Well, welcome everybody to my final days. Are always sad days for everybody. I mean, the Biennale is almost over. I mean, this is time for nostalgia, because all who have been working on this Biennale, as in every Biennale, I mean, in the end, well, they go back with the idea that it has been a great time in any case, because it's the atmosphere, the feelings, the generosity with which each is working for it. I mean, this is the greatest virtue of a cultural institution, to take advantage of the sheer generosity of people. I mean, there is nothing. Presentation of this, the result of the work that has been undertaken in this collaboration that we have started last year. You know, there has been times, the history of the Biennale is more than 120 years, so I mean, everything has already been done somehow, somewhere. It's very, very difficult to be new or original with any initiative, where having on your shoulder so long, more than 120 now, 121. I mean, so there have been times in which the word applied arts was introduced in the Biennales. The Biennale started as a Biennale of art, visual arts. I mean, that was the word. The International Exhibition of Visual Art. But then in 1932, they said, well, we cannot forget, or we have to take account that there is cinema. So they started the first film festival in the world in 1932. And that already was a sort of opening to new forms of arts within the world of visual arts. Then there has been for years a pavilion for applied arts. Applied arts has been very important in Italy for a long time, because there has been a time, and there has been at least a couple of decades, in which there was the idea or the feeling, you know, that it was typical of the Italian culture to devote attention, energies, and imagination to the applied arts. There has been a period in which it is typically, of course this was during fascism, but fascism was not in this, as far as this is concerned, a sort of something to be condemned on the political ground, because these were feeling really felt, I mean, feeling of even of the traditional culture. So there was a time in which applied art, the typical Italian way of producing art in the modern world, is to add to architecture. So by itself, so that was an idea of an art that was engaged in adding, in giving architecture a sort of a special character. We have art. We want to have art everywhere in the space which we live. And there has been a flourishing series of project of architecture that had design, and as a matter of fact, if you look at the history of architecture in this country for the first long decades of last year, you wonder whether they were architects or designers. Because the attention to the design of the building was so strong, and so that, you know, you have to question whether that world was a world of, and of course from that came the great school of design that Italy has developed through times and after the Second World War. So I mean, then design has been after the Second World War, one of the fields in which, this country has been producing quite interesting results and reaching quite interesting levels of production. We can use this awful word, but it's production after all. And the Biennale has had for years a pavilion dedicated to the applied arts. So in recent times, the world of art is made of so many individualities, so many that we cannot rely on having schools, movements, like it has been for the first half of the last century, movement fighting each other, so declaring what they wanted to and being a chief or being a head of the movement and all the others being followers. So you had the keys to understand what was the message, and usually the message was, now we are artists, all what came before us was scrap. It was rubbish. We announce ourselves as the new art, as art, and this has been the 20th century. Everywhere from in Europe and then in the United States, there were artists or movements that were announcing a new way of being artists. Nowadays, we see a sort of dilution of movements in an incredibly wide, large world of individuality, some individuals, each going his own way. And to organize a Biennale of Art has become a search. It's become more than a research. A search in the sense that the curators has really to go around the world and find and discover more than movements, individuals who, by the way, are now, they do not reflect schools coming from different countries or different continents, because there are artists who come from one continent and go to live in another one, and the curriculum of the artist has become really international curriculum. So it's less and less possible to identify movements or even interferences or influences, because everybody is influencing everybody somehow. This sort of more general disposal, this more general attitude of artists being led the world to make some confusion between creativity and art. Of course, the difference between design and art, between applied art and art, is very subjective, but somehow it depends on the kind of necessity you feel about things, about the creation of men. If art does exist if there is the need of art, if we feel the need of it, need of generous acts of creation by themselves, each absolutely useless in terms of practice use, and each useful only to induce a dialogue, to promote knowledge, to promote the dialogue between the artist and we are art as a help to expand our capacity of to expand our eyes, to expand our minds. So it's then of course there is also the creativity, which is highly demand from industry, for instance, from everybody wants creativity. Because, I mean, if you want to do whatever you do, you have to change it through time and to change it very quickly. So creativity has become a tool for competition, for instance, in whatever field. Even formal creativity. I mean, you cannot have the same product. Even cars have to be changed through times, and you have the need of a designer. And there is a lot of part of the industry world that is asking artists to help them finding new forms, which gives you an idea of how the world is getting a bit mixed, a bit confused about the... So the artist, Ella said, I will believe that industry is relying on an artist the day in which an artist will conceive the new Volkswagen as an artist, and the company exactly does what the artist has drawn, which will be certainly unimaginable, because from the idea to the product, there is a long, long work to be of adaptation. And so the applied art is still the world of applying to what we want on the basis of other kind of desires to adapt what we imagine according to the first, what I said, another kind of need of desire, which is a need for art. It's a world that is somehow like the world culture. I mean, everything is expanding, and you must really find sometimes that you are lost in. To be lost in creativity is something that can really happen these days. Applied arts. So it's what we want to do is to. With the Pavilion of Applied Arts. So we want to give an opportunity. I don't want to enter the definition of applied art. Applied art cannot be defined as such. But since we have an instrument, which is the Biennale, which is an exhibition, we're not writing a vocabulary or an encyclopedia. We are just giving opportunities to be seen, to be understood, to be talked about. So opening up to this world of applied arts, where the aims of the artists, of those who have been inducing the development of that kind of artistic creation, is not the free will of the artist, but is something else with some other purpose. Let's put it in this very general way. There is a second purpose to be added to the first one, which is sheer desire to create in a state of total freedom. The second need might be of different kind, and the way in which the demand for this second need is it goes the up and down. The demand confronts with the world of artists can produce very, very different results. But there is no methodology to be, or there is no. It's not a discipline to be investigated. It happens, and it's all to our mind, or to our capability of identify, to understand, to appreciate, and we can be definitely fascinated by a work of art which proclaims to be a work of art. We can be fascinated by a work of applied art who proclaims to be an applied art work. So it's the Biennale as. I mean, all we want to do is to open up and give more opportunities for those who come to visit us to meet other kind of needs who are being faced by those who have in their hands all the tools of the artist, and so on and so forth. Nowadays, we add this new tools of technology, and once again, we are we are facing a sort of possible possible influences that the technology brings to artists. And there is a movement and there is an interest in the industry to have artists to work with technology, because the new product of technology applications of new technology. But once again, we have to be clear that an artist can decide to use the computer or to use putty clay or whatever he wants. I mean, there is nothing, you cannot say this is an artist that is defined according to the technology uses. It's for our just if you write a catalog, of course, you can classify according to the tools and the procedures that an artist follow. Therefore, having this in mind, which is so wide that is even difficult to grasp in single possible project, we had these exchanges of ideas and with our friends of the Victoria and Albert, who had at the same time the same sort of feeling seen from the other point of view. Well, I mean, possibly there is a great demand in the world for creativity linked to second needs. The world of art has gone very far. I mean, the world of art has been invading the world. I mean, we have works of art are being created at a rate unprecedented in the history of human being. I mean, why we cannot forget that there is a demand for a very high quality of imagination, of creativeness and forms from the world that lives with architecture, lives with object, lives with memory, lives with whatever makes the space in which we live, operate as individuals or community. This is applied art. An architecture exhibition is applied art. It's art that responds to a need of that somehow accomplishes or complete our personality as living human beings and being and capable of organizing the space in which we live. And among these, of course, I mean, this was an exchange of view that took place for weeks and months before we decided to sign this agreement, Biennale and Victoria and Albert, and the agreement says no more and no less that we shall dedicate our attention to these phenomena. I mean, it's not a commercial agreement. It just, since we have the feeling that it is worthwhile, and we in the Biennale, we have the same sort of feeling, why don't we join in inventing something new or participating to the exhibitions or to the activity of this cultural institution with new ideas. The first of this, the idea has been to have always in every Biennale a pavilion dedicated to this applied arts world, which is an extension of our imagination. I mean, and to do each time something that is worthwhile doing, because in the end, once it's very difficult to have a single choice in terms of the choices are left to the quality of the single project and case. And you have to be absolutely, from this point of view, pragmatic, because we are in search of the quality, and we are in search of the vitality of what all those who are engaged in creating can bring us. Victoria and Albert, of course, they came here with their we have applied our energies. We have represented in last century, after the first international expo, we have had this idea that to promote knowledge, you have to do something more than just inform indirectly. Forms are very important tool of knowledge. You have to meet forms, and by meeting the form of whatever it is, I mean, a piece of art, you are taken nearer to what the word of what the script can say. So the idea of copies as an instrument of education has been highly developed. Then, from then onwards, and we have had exhibitions, a very interesting exhibition in Venice, not organized by us, on the importance of copies in the Roman and Greek worlds. I mean, they have been living of copies, the traffic of copies of Greek sculpture invaded not only Rome, but all the cities, all the villas, all the senators from France to all the Roman Empire. So the idea that you participate to a phenomenon, to some extent you really go on exchanging something with a tradition or a culture, has been there for centuries. I don't want to get into the awful, terrible arguments of dangers in which the works are, because this seems to bring in alarm that should not, in my opinion, invade what we are doing, because first of all we have to understand exactly what we are doing, the alarm on the possible destructions and so on and so forth. We have been living for thousands of years with monuments being destroyed, rebuilt, and so. So I mean, to some extent, we are very interested in maintaining our heritage, and we have very strong laws about that. But then, of course, we have to face modern times and dangers and whatever happens. I don't, there are people who say that it's useless to organize any possibility to preserve Venice from the tide, because if the sea level goes up as foreseen, I mean, the city of Venice will be lost. This does not mean that the agreement between the Biennale and Victoria and Albert will go up to the point of remaking the whole city 5 meters higher with the technology of today's. This will not be. Still, this is something that in our mind begins to, like a fly, we hear the sound of danger. But I don't want to go on. I'm here just, I've already spoken too much. I'm here most grateful to Sherman, who has been with us and collaborating with us, and with Brandon Cormier, who has been the curator of the exhibition. The exhibition is downstairs. The book has been, it's quite nice. You like it?
I love it, yes.
Yes. Sherman, it's very nice. Huh? So it has been organized in collaboration with our department of the editorial department. So we are celebrating the end of something. I don't like it, but also, in any case, we are celebrating the first agreement between the first result of the agreement between the Victoria and Albert, and of course, we are celebrating what will happen in the future. Thank you.
President Baratta, thank you very much. Let me just say a few words before passing over to Brendan, who has the best right to say everything about this project. But I'd like to just quickly say, and I'm Bill Sherman from the V&A, I'm Director of Collections and Head of Research. And one thing that I want to say is that this has been a very successful coming together of what, at my job, often feel like two different things, collections and research. And it's been very much a home, this building, for a year now, half a year physically, full year in terms of mentally and preparation, for us to think about how to bring together those things and those ideas. And it has been a research project, one of the things that drew us to this collaboration in the first place. And I'm very grateful. It was almost exactly a year ago that President Baratta, others from the Biennale team, Aravena, the curator of the architecture exhibition, V&A team, Brendan, all came together around the boardroom in the Victoria and Albert Museum and thought, what might we do together around this topic that Aravena had set, reporting from the front. That was the starting point, this phrase that he used. Brendan came up with an extraordinary idea, which, as President Baratta says, took us from the world of applied arts to the world of fragile parts. And it's a very beautiful idea and a very powerful idea. And it's been a great privilege to be able to explore it together. It's produced in very short time for us. I know you do this all the time. Manuela, I'm looking in particular. All the time. For us, this was a very rapid process, and yet one that still tried to bring a museum quality experience, bring museum objects to the Biennale, and combine them with the kinds of ambiance, the kinds of intellectual atmosphere that flourishes in this place every year, over and over. And we've produced very quickly an exhibition, a summer school, my favorite part. I was here for over a week in this very room, and now a book. And I'm really proud and delighted by this year's worth of collaboration. And it feels, as President Baratta says, a little melancholy because it is the end of quite a long and powerful process, but it's the celebration of the beginning of other things. And the book coming at the end of the process actually is quite handy for that because it gives us this chance to launch something new. Now, quickly, I want to just say one thing which has been interesting. I'm a scholar of the Renaissance period in particular, and I work a lot on the history of reproduction, but the V&A has been for me, and I've only been there for about 2.5 years, a lesson in the history of reproduction technology. It's full of original things, 2.5 million original things. But it is also a temple of reproduction. And plaster casts in the 19th century were an extraordinary tool for pedagogy, for learning from copying, and for remote tourism, that kind of thing, armchair tourism, but also for preservation. And the technologies that flourished in the 19th century are very much on display downstairs. Plaster casts, which is at the V&A, a huge 2 rooms of our museum, photography, and electrotyping, copying in metal. And all 3 of those are represented downstairs. And in a way, Brendan had the very simple, very brilliant idea of saying, if we were doing a cast court now, a plaster cast court now, what would you copy and in what form? That was the simple question, or 2 questions. what would you copy and in what form? And everything you see downstairs is a response to that. And so part of what we wanted to do was bring the history to bear. So we've brought plaster, we've brought metal, we've brought photography. We've really tried to reflect on that 19th century legacy, that 19th century challenge, but put it into a 21st century context. And that's technology, of course, digital photography, 3D scanning, 3D printing. And it's also about the changing world that we live in. And this idea of fragile parts has been not alarmist, but, as you say, hearing in our ear always the warnings. And I think that's been a little bit prophetic, because this year has become, for me and for, I think, most of us, more fragile. It's been a year with quite a lot of fragmentation, quite a lot of challenge on the international stage. And I think those things have been framed by the work we've done together, but actually made more tolerable by being together and by the kind of companionship and collaboration that has seen us through the whole process. But I have to say, the one technology of reproduction that we didn't cover, and it's the one I've devoted most of my scholarly life to, is the book. And so what I am very happy about ultimately is that we finally finished that whole series of reproduction technologies with printing and with a physical book that the Renaissance period in particular saw as the way to combat fragmentation, decay, death. The printed word endures. And that's why I'm so pleased, above all, that Brendan, thank you, and his colleagues and the curatorial team, and all of our colleagues with the Biennale and the production and editorial team have managed in the end to produce this fantastic catalog. So very, very pleased that it's happened for all of those reasons. And again, I think puts down a marker for our future collaboration. The last thing I want to say before handing over to Brendan is it also puts down a marker for something that we have worked on all year together with the Biennale and will continue over the next year. So again, this is the end of something this weekend, but it's also the beginning of another year of work on, if you go downstairs, you must pick up one of these, which is the free giveaway poster, which is the text on one side of the 1867 charter that our founding director produced, called the Convention for the Universal Reproduction of Works of Art. So in 1867, Henry Cole, our founding director, had this idea that we must make available to each other around different countries copies of our masterpieces, copies of our cultural heritage. That's what this text is all about, a very simple, very short political agreement, really. And what Brendan had the clever idea of doing is on the back side, he asked all of the contributors to the exhibition downstairs to provide their notes for, if we were doing a new charter now, what would it look like? What should it say? What doesn't the 1867 charter say? So next year, if you can do your math, is the 150th anniversary of this charter. And so we will, over the next 12 months, the V&A will work with various contributors from this exhibition on a new charter that we will hopefully this time next year announce at the V&A and have a signing ceremony. And we invite you now, Paolo, to come and join us and be one of the signatories. And so our idea is, over this next 12 months, create a new charter for the universal reproduction of works of art. So this is the future for the next year, our new challenge. So thank you very much, and I now hand over to Brendan.
Right. Okay, thanks, Bill. That was really kind of you to say all those nice things. And you've taken about half of what I wanted to say. So, no, that makes my life a lot easier. I was just going to say, I often scratch my head a lot about book launches and what one says at a book launch, because obviously everything that you want to say is in the book. And this is especially bizarre because this book says everything I wanted to say about the show downstairs, which you can just go see. So it's a bit confusing, but I'll try and enlighten us to some kind of bonuses, B-sides in this brief little talk. But maybe I thought, because Paolo was saying, it's a nostalgic moment, I would take you back to about a year ago, to the boardroom that you were talking, or maybe before that, to when the director at the time, Martin Roth, came up to me, he told me about this collaboration and about the possibility of doing a pavilion of applied arts at the Venice Biennale. I thought it was an incredibly kind of curious challenge in a way. I've attended the Venice Biennale for the last 4 architecture biennales. And you notice a trend in these biennales, which is constantly trying to push the agency of architecture, saying, you know, architecture can do this, architecture can do that, architecture can be so much more. And then, you know, now we've been asked as a completely different discipline, although related discipline, applied arts, and we're quite cheekily saying, well, we can also do that as well. So, you know, trying to elbow our way into an architectural discourse and find kind of possibly synergies or different points of view. So, Martin asked me to come up with a show, and I thought maybe I would just tell you a few of the starting points for the thinking of why we ended up doing a show like this. And it starts from a few curiosities I had at the time. And the first was a general curiosity about copying. That copying actually came from across the world. I'm working on a V&A gallery in Shenzhen, and so for the last 2 years I've been doing a lot of research out there. And of course, China famously or infamously is known for copies. And what we were doing there last year was really trying to look into the idea of, you know, trying to take the denigrated term copy and find some value in it, and really discover how copying and this kind of ecosystem of copying in China is actually a creative tool or outlet. So that was very interesting. And then at the same time, I have to say that I'm also relatively new to the museum. So I've been there for 2 years. And the one thing you realize at a museum is when you start dealing with all these kinds of protocols for object handling is just how fragile and how immense a task it is to preserve objects at a museum. And it actually becomes quite depressing. You deal with certain works, let's say works on paper. We have protocols for works on paper where we can only show a specific work once every 10 years. And then when you show it, you can only show it under so much light level. And then you put it back in the dark. And it's not as if when you put it back in the dark, the colors magically regenerate. It fades, and then you show it again, and it fades, and you show it again, and it fades. So it is this kind of epic, but almost like Sisyphus pushing the boulder up the hill. So fragility is just a kind of leitmotif of working at a museum. And that all brings me to this idea of the cast courts, which Bill did discuss. But if you ever do go to the V&A, the cast courts are one of the most interesting places at the V&A. And they highlight this kind of unusual moment in the history of museums. And that is the late 19th century, when there was a great urge or mandate to satisfy a public and show them great works of art, and also with this idea that the public can't travel. So the concept of the cast court was very simple. We want to show great works of art and architecture. We can't move the originals to the museum, so we make copies. And from there, I mean, I think Bill kind of talked about it. It all started to unravel. We have this great tradition of copy making. We've been conserving them for 150 years, and because we've been conserving them, they've actually outperformed many of their originals. So we have a Trajan's column, which has, you know, some better detailing on it than the original Trajan's column, because it's in the museum. So that all came together with this idea that, you know, this idea of making copies and this idea of making a cast court is an incredible tool for preservation or for keeping knowledge. And we decided to show that here, and exactly what Bill said. Question what happens if we update that with new digital fabrication technologies. And we invited a series of artists and architects and designers to contemplate that. 2 of them are here in the audience right now, Mark Smout and Laura Allen, who did a lovely piece downstairs about Robin Hood Gardens. Yeah, and I won't say much more. I'll say a couple notes about the book, because Bill was spot on when he said, you know, books are a form of preservation. One of the most frustrating things about exhibition making is that it's very fleeting. You make them and then they disappear. And often you make catalogs before the exhibition opens. So as a curator, if I want to know more about the show, I'm often left with very little resources to understand what's in the show. So we had the luxury of making this catalog at the end, which means we can actually catalog what's in the show and what it looks like. And I think that's very special. So I hope you do all get a copy. I don't know, where will they be? Do we know where they'll be? Do we know where the copies will be? In the bookshop. Wonderful. So that's it. Thanks a lot.
No, I just want to add that you can rely on the fact that we have another instrument of preserving knowledge, which is a very powerful and big and very well organized archive. So you will be there, nobody will damage the result of what has been done. All the documents will be preserved, and all the photographs and the exhibition will be stored in such a way that it can be reproduced in the future. This is exactly what we are trying to do with the exhibitions we held in 91, in 1899 and 2000. And the problem of, and the organization of an archive for an institution like ours, where each Biennale is a unique phenomenon, and that has to be stored from in many different ways. I mean, from the correspondence between the curator and the artist, for the images, the choices of the space, the changes that had been made, and I mean, it's another, after, I mean, just to say that after the end of this Biennale, another work it will be performed for the storing of it and for accumulating this knowledge, which is once again helped by new technology, of course. But so it's just for the sake of we won't make copies of your exhibition, but it will be there to be revisited and to be visited once again in the future. Now, at this point, I should, it could be useful to tell you what we are going to do next year. But since we have I mean, it's our tradition that we disclose the program of the Biennales not earlier than the end of February, together with all the rest of the Biennale. I cannot help. I mean, I have to. I mean, my press office would kill me if I make any sort of announcement, because it has all to be presented at once, and we'll, as usually, we will hold press conferences here in Venice, and then in London, and in Paris, and in Berlin, and New York, so for the full disclosure of all the content of the next Biennale. The next Biennale will be Biennale of Art, so all I can tell you is that the Pavilion of Applied Art, which according to the agreement will be organized by a curator appointed by us, will be dealing with themes that are more fit with the Biennale of Art instead of a Biennale of architecture. But this is all I am allowed to anticipate, and once again, thank you. If anybody wants to ask something, we are ready to answer. Or is anything that we have?
No, but there's drink, I think, and then also downstairs, Brendan can show.
Yes, so no question time, so we drink time and downstairs with Brendan. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you.